Greetings. Welcome back to the Cape Lead Revolution. This is Chachi, again coming to you from Phoenix, but also from beautiful Colorado Springs at the United States Air Force Academy with Colonel Scott Soup Campbell. Colonel Campbell, welcome to the Cape Lead Revolution.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. Happy to be here. So our viewers and listeners will know that we've already done about this first 5 minutes that we're having to do again. Thanks to the glitch in the matrix, everybody is up on the interwebs and watching Tiger King and making all that stuff happen. So something happened with our audio. So we're having to redo this, but that kind of brings up a good point. So all the viewers and listeners, if the quality kind of degrades a little bit here, I apologize. My wife and kids could walk through the door at any time. Same thing may happen with Colonel Campbell. So again, hey, life is happening. It's a Friday afternoon. We're just trying to find our way through this COVID-19 process, but still give some leaders and people out there something to digest that maybe they're going to benefit from and take away from this. So with that, Colonel Campbell, we'll kind of turn it over to you. If you would mind, just kind of give our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Graduated from the Air Force Academy in '95, so that's when I was commissioned into the Air Force. Went off out of here to pilot training, where I was lucky enough to get an A-10 out of pilot training. So got checked out as an A-10 pilot. Showed up in my first assignment at Pope Air Force Base. So for our younger viewers, yes, it was an Air Force Base at one time. So the Army would always argue it was theirs. But where Chachi and I met, so not only was I there in my first fighter squadron, but I was Battalion Air Liaison Officer with the 14th ASOS. And then Lieutenant Campbell and Senior Airman Pachesa were a dynamic duo with 3rd of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Not something I really expected to do when I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, but that's how life takes turns. And so pretty awesome experience. So that's something that helped me out in my career. But from there, I left Pope and went to the Air Force Weapons School as a student. Graduated from there, then off to Osan, back to Pope Air Force Base, and then back to Nellis as a weapons school instructor for a few years. Then headed out to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the good side of the base, where I attended Army Command and Staff College for my intermediate developmental education program. And then after a year of that, I got to get back into the cockpit. So back to the A-10, to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, where I served both as an ops officer and then as a fighter squadron commander there for a few years. Then back for some more schooling, this time senior developmental education at the National War College in Washington, D.C. After my year in War College, I was deployed for a year as the ops group commander at Kandahar Air Base in Afghanistan. And then following my year of command there, had to pay my penance and got sent to the Pentagon, where I served for 2 years in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for policy, working in the Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia as a country director for Afghanistan policy. And then escaped the Pentagon and back to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base as the fighter wing commander there for 2 years. And then following command, moved here to Colorado Springs and get to finish out my last couple of years in the Air Force at the Academy. Served a year as the Vice Commandant, now working up in the A3 operations and manpower. Also doing a little instructing both on the academic side and as a flight instructor here. And then 2 months from today, we'll hang up my spurs and retire from the Air Force along with my wife after 25 years. So been a pretty good run.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations for an amazing career. I've loved that you and I have gotten to stay in touch over all these years and just, communicate, collaborate, and just, have fun along the way. It's always been nice that I've always had, reach out capability to you. So I appreciate that. And congratulations for an amazing career. You're one of the living legends in the A-10 community. So I know the Air Force is going to hate to lose you there. But as one of the things that we kind of started talking about is just kind of the the birthplace of leadership, and just really a very simple understanding of what it means to be a good leader. And for some of the advice that you give some of your cadets there, if you wouldn't mind going into some of that, please.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this, but it's, that it's not hard and it's not complicated. Sometimes they're out there, it's like searching for the fountain of youth or something, but, frequently have to tell them that, there's no recipe. You can read 100 books on it, but at its core, I always fall back, of course, it's my background of being a graduate of and an instructor at the weapons school, but the humble, approachable, credible mantra, I think, has a lot to it. And so what I tell them is, that being a good person, being a good dudette, has a lot to do with it. And, when they say, hey, a lot of our cadets are going to go into pilot training, 500 of the 1,000 that graduate go right into pilot training. And so a lot of the questions are, what do I do? How do I succeed in that environment? And it's sort of that same approach to things. I said, look, I go, when you show up every day, you show up prepared, you show up ready to learn, and you show up with a good attitude. And I say, if you do that, that's 90% of the battle. The techniques and the hands and the brains of flying will all come with that. But if you set the stage that way, the instructor is going to be more inclined to get you across the finish line. They're going to be more inclined to put more of their effort in to help you out. And I said, so a lot of it is showing up with that attitude. The other piece of it is, I tell them, is being that good dude or dudette is also helping out your teammates. And I said, when you hear the cooperate and graduate mantra that goes with pilot training, goes with a lot of courses that we've all been part of. I said, so it over probably the last decade or so took kind of a negative connotation, because we had cheating scandals in pilot training, we had cheating scandals in the missileer community. I said, that's not what it means. What it means is helping each other out. I said, because in every phase of any training course you're ever going to go to, you're going to find some strengths and you're going to find some weaknesses. You're going to find that you're going to hit a phase and you're going to rock it and you're going to excel, but you're going to have classmates who are not. And when you've got that extra bandwidth because you're humming along and you get it, that's your chance to help them out, because you're going to hit another section of the course where it's not going to be second nature to you. You're not going to get it very easily. You're going to struggle with it. And then that kid next to you who does get it is going to be there to help you. And that is going to follow you through your career. And so I tell them is, that never goes away. I mean, every stage in your life, like you alluded to, right? As a wing commander, you're going to hit a problem set that is, you're not going to have a good answer for it. And you're going to pick up the phone, and you're going to call another wing commander, or you're going to reach out to, a guy you were youngsters with, whether it be as lieutenants or like, look at you and me, as a lieutenant and a senior airman. And then 20 years later, we find ourselves as wing commanders and command chiefs, comparing notes. And so, and it's about establishing those relationships, and having that trust, because it never goes away. So I tell them that, that's the cornerstone, and it's one of those things it doesn't change. It just, it morphs, but it's always there.
So with that, where do you think in your career, do you think you learned that lesson first? And, or what do you think like your earliest success as a leader was, where you started to get a glimpse of what that really meant in the practical application of helping teams find success?
I learned it in pilot training, because I saw the good and the bad. I saw, example of a guy who had incredible natural abilities, but was hell bent on getting and I understand goals, but you can be focused and you can strive to achieve your goal without leaving everybody in your wake, and helping others along the way. And what we saw was, this individual, he had the extra bandwidth because he was a natural and flying came easy to him. And we had some guys in my class who were struggling, that he probably could have helped out and chose not to. And so, I say with both, leaders, I used to say in ALS all the time. I'd walk into our ALS graduating class with my command chief, and I would always challenge them, and I'd say, if I give you 5 seconds to name me the best or the worst leader you've ever worked for, which one comes to mind quicker? And they all would smirk. And it wasn't a good smirk because I knew what the answer was. It was the bad leader. And I said, and we'd pull the thread on that and say, why is that? And I'd say, okay, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because we can learn from both. But for me, that was the guy I remember. I mean, I know we had guys in our class who were helping each other out, but that one burned into my mind. And it was one of those, like we do with bad leaders, we go, well, that's something I'm never going to do, or I will never be that guy, or I hope not. And so in that case, I think I saw and learned that early. I think where I really got to put it to work, I think I had a lot of my awakening as a leader was probably at weapons school as a student. And so I was surrounded, I had a number of good classmates with me, and I got to see, that the teamwork really at play there, because you just don't survive that course without each other. But I think I really got to put it into play as a weapons officer when I got back to Pope, where I recognized one of the big things for me, it was to recognize. So I went to OSAN, and for me, I was a very immature weapons officer. And what I felt I had to do was prove to everybody in my squadron that I was the best at everything. And not just because I was a graduate from the weapons school and I was the chief of weapons and tactics, but I had to go out there every day and win every bomb and every strafing contest and be the, and be the smartest. And I felt like I had to prove it to everybody every day, which, I mean, that doesn't sound like a bad thing, but it was, because I didn't realize that at the time that, and this was where the humility side was being dwarfed by the credibility side. So in my mind, credible was just showing everybody that I could crush any of them at anything, right? And it wasn't that. It was the, and this as well as an instructor, it's the measure of you as an instructor isn't whether you can execute well, it's whether you can get the kid who can't to do it. And so that's when I had this awakening that I didn't have to be better than everybody at all times. Like, I really had to be better at, giving my time and my effort to helping other people get as good as, I thought I was. And then the other piece of that recognizing was that recognition that I'm actually not the best, and I don't have to be. Nobody expects it of me either. I mean, maybe there's some of that expectation, but as soon as I came to that, it was huge for me to recognize that now it's okay to not be the best. And that helped me grow so much as an instructor, because then I started asking other people and it cut in both directions as a positive to go to one of my instructors and go, hey, I'm having a hard time teaching Johnny this one thing. I've exhausted my toolkit. What do you use in this case? And man, a young instructor going, holy cow, our chief instructor pilot just asked me for his technique. He's supposed to have all the techniques and he doesn't, and that's okay. And so I think that it's, and my wife, when she goes out and speaks, Truth in Lending, also an A-10 fighter pilot, she talks a lot about vulnerable leadership, and I've learned over time that's what this is, right? It's it's that vulnerability of going, no, I'm not the best. I have actually a lot of weaknesses, and I actually do need to seek out other people's opinions and other people's techniques. So I think that that was my big awakening from the teamwork perspective is building your network is to be able to reach out and have that access, because you're not going to always have the answer. And back then it was at the tactical level. But later on, I used it at the higher levels of leadership in the same manner where, as a wing commander, asking a squadron commander, what do you think? Or what would you do in this scenario? Because I actually don't have the answer right. I'm not doing this as a rhetorical question. And I think that builds, that builds your credibility as a leader, because everybody understands that you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. And it's okay to ask for help.
So kind of along those lines, one of the cool things that I think the Air Force does is that, when you get selected for wing command, they are at that point kind of promoting you based off of a lot of technical competence and technical expertise. But now all of a sudden, you're commanding Davis-Monthan Air Force Base down in Tucson, Arizona, and you have all these different entities that you have no experience in, no understanding of. Obviously, you're going to have a general stuff by that point in your career. How much of a challenge was that for you? How enlightening was that? What did you do prepare, and how did you find that entire wing command time frame to be for as far as testing your leadership mettle?
It was definitely tough, in a lot of respects, and you're exactly right. Which is, and it's a thing that I talk about frequently as a negative to how we grow our officer leaders, particularly in the flying community, particularly in the fighter pilot community. Because what ends up happening is you're spot on, and you know this because you've lived in our world, is we build technicians, right? And then we don't, I remember when I got to War College, one of my Army buddies, who's now the Deputy Commanding General at the 82nd, used to give me a lot of crap because he used to talk about it as a fighter squadron commander. The size of my command was the same size of his command as a first lieutenant, platoon leader. And it's fair. I mean, I get it. I'll take that. But what happens is, I develop you as a fighter squadron commander, and you lead a bunch of officers around, and very few enlisted because we've broken maintenance out. And then I make you an ops group commander, and now you lead 3 or 4 of these same squadrons, which are minus the OSS. So the OSS has most of your enlisted force for the ops group, but it's still very officer heavy, and you're still doing a lot of that technician stuff. And then all of a sudden you get slammed into wing command, and then there you have it all. And I was fortunate, because when I went to Kandahar, I was an ops group commander, but we shut the wing down. And little did I know, I was very mad at our chief of staff of the Air Force, now chief of staff of the Air Force. General Goldfein was the CFAC at the time. And I was supposed to go to Bagram to be the ops group commander up there, which was going to enable me to be flying the A-10 in combat. So I was very excited about that. And then 3 days before I was to show up for my transition, my checkout again in the A-10, because I'd been out of the jet for a year, I got a phone call from then Major General Wilsbach, who said, yeah, new plan, you need to get to Holloman and get checked out in the MQ-9. I was like, what? I don't want to fly a drone. This sucks. I was a whiny, pissed off fighter pilot, because now I got to go get checked out in the MQ-9, and now I'm going to Kandahar instead of Bagram. And what I didn't know, which again, all this time in life, and I still couldn't fully accept that trust of my senior leadership to know that they're doing the best thing for me. But the truth of the matter was there was a plan, and General Goldfein was executing that plan, which was, how do we get him the experience to be a better wing commander? He knew he was shutting that wing down at Kandahar, and I was going to get it all dumped in my lap. So 4 months in, the wing shuts down, the maintenance group commander leaves, the mission support group commander leaves, and it's all mine now. And so now I have, as an ops group, no longer ops group, now I'm an AEG commander. I now no longer just have my 8 flying squadrons, but I have maintenance, I have a comm squadron, I have a logistics squadron, I have a air control squadron. I have prime beef, the civil engineers. And so, man, so I got a little bit of opportunity to at least get that experience, but it still wasn't preparing me, to lead that group of 1,000 to then walk onto an installation of 11,000 and take over as the wing commander with 20 squadrons in my wing. But not just that, but then I have all these other crazy cats and dogs with rescue and the electronic combat group. And I've got the guard and the reserves, and I've got an AOC, and my 3-star boss lives next door to me. But back to the core point that I know you're alluding to is, I don't need, I've got the weapons school instructor patch on my arm. I have a reputation in the A-10 community. I don't need to prove to them I'm good at that. I've done that at this point, I guess when I took command of the wing, 21 years. So what I did is actually, when I went into my immersion, and I got some great mentorship from some previous wing commanders who I stayed in touch with, who were my wing commanders back in the day, said, leave the ops group last. As you're getting immersed in what's going on in your wing, go to the areas you're least comfortable with. And Major General Johnson, PJ Johnson, who was the wing commander who hired me as a squadron commander, said if anywhere I would start with the medical group, because that's where you're going to be least comfortable, and they're the weirdest. And he said that in a very loving way. He's like, you're just not going to get that. Like, their approach to the world is very different than yours as an operator. And so one of the key comes back to that vulnerable leadership, which was an awesome thing that I did with my command chief was, and it paid so much dividends, was every week I picked a different squadron. And I said, you've got 4 hours with us. It was kind of like dirty jobs. You have 4 hours, and the command chief would tell him, like, look, this is not show and tell, PowerPoint, none of that crap. This is 4 hours. You get the boss and the command chief, and it's your airman's chance to show us what you do. Like, and show us all the hard stuff, dirty stuff, nasty stuff, least sexy stuff. And so, man, they put me through my paces. And it was, I would come in and be like, and it was all open kimono, right? Like, I have no idea how to do this. Like, I have no idea what it takes to do. I went out to the bomb dump, and the EMS commander was just laughing. He goes, man, sir, they got you set up today. He's like, you're doing 30 millimeter loads for the gun. And I was like, cool, that sounds fun. He's like, it's not. He goes, it may be fun for you to shoot it. It's not fun to build the load. He goes, and you're going to have this horrible medieval tool we call the spoon. And it's this giant wrought iron, probably 5-foot piece of metal with a scoop on the end, which you literally, as the dragon dumps all these 30 millimeter in these giant cans, you're the guy who's raking it and jamming. And it's counterintuitive because I'm jamming this huge metal thing into 30 millimeter rounds. I'm like, is this stuff going to explode on me? And they're like, don't worry about it. And the airmen are laughing because to them, they're like, look, this guy's a dumbass. Like, he doesn't know anything. They expect it. Like, I know everything. And I'm like, I know, they're laughing at me. They're watching me struggle. My knuckles are bloody, and I'm asking questions, and they're looking at me. They're like, you really don't know that? I'm like, no, that's why I'm here with you guys. I'm like, you, Senior Airman Jones, are the expert. You're the head of this load crew. That's why I'm here with you. You're here to teach me. And it was mind blowing to them. And, and that's what we did every stop. I put my coveralls on, and we serviced hydraulics on the jet. The medical group thought it would be absolutely hilarious for me to sit in the lab and test urine samples. But I just, yep, okay. That's this is what our airmen do. And I'm like, and to see that I didn't kind of, look at it and go, I'm not doing that. I'm like, okay, where's my lab coat? Where's my rubber gloves? I'm checking to see if some of our female airmen are pregnant. Okay. You know, I mean, it's just, I think that that's huge. I mean, I think that that goes, that went so far for them. And you and I had talked about it earlier about now come back to approachable, you know, so there's the humility. It's okay to not have credibility. That's not what I do. That's not the Air Force. That's what the Air Force pays you to do, not me to do. But the approachable, that builds that approachability, because all of a sudden they're like, he just said he didn't know how to do something. He turned to a senior airman and asked the senior airman like a knowledge-based question. And then all of a sudden it was like, you know, and a few of them actually made the comment, which, you know, I took it wasn't intended to be a backhanded, you know, compliment, but it was like, wow, sir, you're actually human. I'm like, yeah, I am, you know? And so I think that that's huge, is to walk in and just go, like, you have to have some self-awareness, right? And it's that emotional intelligence and all those things to say, know what you don't know. And I think that you will, as a leader walking in, to admit it up front, you know, and realize that you're going to get more out of, I think that our young leaders, and that's why I alluded to that point early on. And luckily I learned it as a captain, and it served me well to walk in, to be able to understand that I actually gain more by walking in and owning ignorance and admitting it and asking questions of my experts than coming in and having everybody be in awe because I allegedly know everything, or I can at least talk in a good enough game that they think I. So I think that's a key thing as a leader, to be able to go in and do that and understand that it's okay. I mean, there may be some of that initial, you don't know that, that's okay. And I think that there's a lot of fear in that, you know, people, I think too many people that's the balance. People feel that they're going to lose credibility. Well, maybe you lose a little, but the amount you're banking in the humility, approachability side is going to pay tenfold. And so I think that that's something that a lot of folks need to get past versus walking in as the pro from Dover.
You know, so man, you know, absolutely phenomenal answer. And I think, you know, it's one of those things like, you know, perspective is one of the things that you can't necessarily explain. You can only understand it when you get more of it, you know? And so I remember being a young guy and just being utterly confused. And I hated when commanders and command chiefs came by and I had to do a dog and pony show. And I'm like, I don't need their validation. I don't need them to come by and tell me I'm doing a good job. I didn't realize that visit wasn't for me. That was for them, so they can gain some more perspective, so they can lobby on behalf of the equities that are, you know, happening there inside that wing and organization. So I screwed that one up for years, just out of pure blind ignorance. I self-centered. I thought that was about me and meeting me and what Tim Pachesa contributes. That was about them. That was about giving them a little bit of perspective, of understanding what we truly do. Is, you know, I think that's a phenomenal example for a guy who shoots the 30 millimeter gun out of his A10 to go to watch people struggle. If you try to load it, like I shoot it, like this is not what I do. I think there's no better understanding of how that goes. And so I think kind of with that, based on the perspective you have now, is there anything that you would go back and talk to Lieutenant Campbell about finding success throughout the Air Force, or just say, you know, give him a little heads up about what his career had in store for him?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing was understanding that, you know, the credibility, that you have to balance those three things. And I think that for me, it was like, I just walked in that, like, and part of it was that environment and the culture, the fighter pilot culture, was, you know, you had to be the best. You could never, you know, or my perception was like, you couldn't show weakness, you know, you had to, you know, you could never be wrong. You could, you know, and all those things, which was, it actually goes counter to what I eventually learned what the culture was, right? Which was the debrief, which is, you know, and that's one of those things, like, you know, in business, they struggle with the same idea of, which is why so many people are like, you know, not to put a blind, shameless plug in for a buddy of mine, Cujo Teschner, who wrote The Art of the Debrief, which is, the business world gobbles that up because it's a foreign concept to them. Like when you go in to like a board meeting or a shareholders meeting, it's all about painting the rosy picture, right? You want to take whatever went well this year and you're going to focus on all that, which is counter to what we do, right? Which is the debrief is we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on what went well, right? And people walk in and sit in our debriefs and they're like, man, what is it with you guys having us beat each other down on everything that went wrong? And that's all and it's like, well, I don't need to spend time. We just go, what went right? Okay, remember that and replicate. Okay, we don't need to spend time slapping each other on the backs and saying, you're doing the Hancock, good job. It's let's get after what didn't go right, because that's how you improve. You don't improve, it's the same idea, this idea that you don't, if what you're good at, to use a sports analogy, is a 10-foot jump shot, then don't spend all day long shooting 10-foot jump shots because it makes you feel good because you don't miss. When you suck at the 3-pointer, that's where you should be spending your time. And so I think for me was, how do you find that balance of you're credible, but seeking feedback, seeking out experts, recognizing what you're not good at, and not going out, it's the same thing in the bombing range, right? If, the going out and, doing your bread and butter delivery that you are the best in the squadron at. So you take your 4-ship out and you're going to show all the young guys how good you are. Okay, yeah, they'll be in awe, but they probably are already. But you get more out of it when they go, so why are we doing this delivery today? It's kind of a non-standard delivery, or we don't do this, man. And you start out, you lead right off and go, well, because I suck at it, or it's one of my weaknesses. And they're like, what? And then all of a sudden that culture starts grabbing on. And so I think that if I had recognized earlier, I could have been better sooner as a leader versus a technician. I think I had focused my craft more on lifting others than just constantly striving to be better. Okay. And maybe that's counterintuitive, but I was over focused on credibility. And as such, I thought it was all about being the best technician, and that actually I was buying credibility, not through my ability to employ the weapon system, which of course that's always a big part of it, but the time I spent on my instructor abilities and the time I spent in making others better, actually made me better. Like I didn't really recognize that actually in the course of trying to teach others and make them better at our craft, I was actually elevating my own craft in doing so versus doing the single focus, me, study, how do I do this better, watch more tape, do all these things and not worry about helping the other guys and gals around me, but just focus on sharpening my own sword, right? And so I think that's one of the things that I would really try to pass on to my younger self, that get that idea sooner. I probably would have done a lot better as a leader sooner, especially in my captain major years.
Roger that. Man, phenomenal points. Great answers. I appreciate that. And with that, we'll take it to our first break. So everyone stay tuned. We will be right back with Colonel Scott Campbell. Catch you in a bit. All right, welcome back from break. We're back here with Colonel Scott Soup Campbell, and just looking forward to the second half of this conversation. And you're talking about all the different levels of school that you've had, on the Army side, the Air Force side, the National War College, joint, and again, that's a very, very elite school that our young up-and-comers get to go to. So for people who are probably listening or watching, you don't realize how big of a deal that is. That's an amazing school that people get to go to. But with all that education, with all of your experience, with all of the different perspective that you've had from the different roles and responsibilities and all your different military movements and deployments, what are some of the best things that you've learned as far as maybe some of your favorite books or movies that you like to watch, or TED Talks, or podcasts or conversations? What are some of the most impactful things that you could hopefully maybe guide people towards?
Well, the funny thing is that, with a career at the speed at which it moves, I think the only 2 years I spent time reading anything that wasn't a tactics manual was probably at Command and Staff College and War College, just because the time isn't there to do it. Which I always tell guys that that's the great thing about those years. Those years in school are the years you actually get time to think again. That's not solving a tactical problem every moment of the day. I think for me, I'm a huge Simon Sinek guy. I've been lucky enough to spend time with Simon and pick his brain, but all of his book, I'm a why guy. I'm an acolyte of his. Truth in Lending, Start with Why is absolutely huge. Leaders Eat Last. I got The Infinite Game sitting on the shelf is the next thing I dive into. I also have problems because I'll get into 5 books at once. I have an ADHD thing going on there. I'm a couple chapters into Gerald Mattis's book because I love that man. And I'm excited about that book. Interestingly enough, the books that I really like, I'll tell you one of the first leadership. I'm not a big leadership book guy. Interestingly enough, I'm all about an experience, and when I say experience, not just mine, but talking to other people. I get more miles out of that. But I think that the one that I always give our young cadets, and I think I still have like 3 copies of it because you can get it free in the Air Force, which again I learned that after I bought the first copy of it. But Gerald Goldfein's book of sharing success and owning failure. He wrote that back when I think he was in War College or maybe in Command Staff College. I can't remember which one, but it's a quick read. It's short book, but it's awesome. Just because I'm a big ownership guy. I did a big post the other day on LinkedIn about it. I've been pretty impressed with Governor Cuomo, saying, hey, don't blame the mayor, don't blame the county executives. That's my call. It's my authority, my call, nobody else. Be mad at me. And so that's, I think, one of the great things. I think Gerald Goldfein's, that whole concept of, and he talks about it all the time, right? And I used to say this all the time. He'd say, it's not your squadron, it's the Air Force's squadron. And so it's what's striking that balance, because we know when guys say my squadron, we want all the members of the squadron to have that ownership, but the commander doesn't own. And that whole sharing success, owning failure thing is, I think, a big one that's always resonated with me. One of my good friends, took command of Davis-Monthan from me. Mike Dralley has a great TEDx talk where he shares some war stories, and he talks about identity, which I think is a pretty good one.
And he's even referenced in Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek in the first chapter. The
first chapter, right? And so, and he's a tremendous, weapons school commandant, was the commander of the A-10, the 66 Weapons Squadron at the weapons school. He's about to go back as the Nellis Wing commander here this summer. Tremendous leader. I think I'm a big fan of more philosophy of not leadership philosophy, but our craft. And so one of the ones that I make a lot of my cadets that I mentor is they go into the profession of arms. Karl Marlantes has a book called What It Is Like to Go to War. It's a phenomenal book. He was a Marine infantryman in Vietnam, but it's a really interesting read, and one that I've thoroughly enjoyed. I am a big movie guy because, especially being downrange where I could have spent time reading, I was watching, binging all kinds of stuff. But I will say that for me, from a leadership perspective, not one that I think jumps out at everybody. There's some standard ones I think everybody, is their go-to movies. I'm a big Band of Brothers fan from a leadership perspective. And if you're a personality guy, some people won't be surprised. Spears was my favorite dude in that movie. If you go back to the episode where they take over Foy, I showed it at the weapons school all the time. I show it to my cadets, but where he gets sent in to relieve Lieutenant Dyke, who's the silver spoon in the mouth West Pointer, and Spears pretty hardcore. Another one though, that the one I was alluding to that's a little known, I don't think guys look at it through the leadership lens. U571. I use that. I recently referenced it with our air officers commanding and third group here. I'm their senior mentor. And we were having a discussion about performance reports and stratifications and all the fun that goes along with that. And they were struggling with this concept. And I told them, I said, this is only going to get harder as you become a more senior leader, because the mantra I put to my group commanders was, you can't save them all. And unfortunately, our leadership goes into not just a pyramid, but a very steep thin spire, a spindle, if you will. And I said, and I told my group commanders very straight talk. I go, just like the four of you, I go, history tells me I can probably get one of you into a wing to command a wing. I go, it's not to say that you all aren't capable. I said, but in the end, I said, so, this is what you have to tell your squadron commanders is, at some point, there's tough love, and they're hard calls. And that's one of the things, because one of the conversations was, and U571's good, especially for our middle level leaders. And I used to is the fact that there's a certain point when we put you in position of leadership or command that you can no longer be close in that way to your folks, right? Because it will inhibit you from making the right hard decision when you are too close. And so that's one of my little one of my movies. I think that a lot of people don't jump right on. I think there's the obvious ones out there that that's one of my favorites personally. That it's one of my go-to movies when I talk about leadership. That's kind of not an obvious one.
It's funny. Like one of my not obvious ones is the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt and Billy Beane. And if we're going to talk, number one, I hate, and for all you viewers and listeners who've listened to my podcast, that I hate the phrase change management, because we don't change anything. I can turn ice into water by letting it sit. That's a change. In the military, inside our organizations, we don't change, we evolve. And that's us being in tune to our environmental things around us, understanding what's impacting us, and then finding our way through success, no matter what that means. And that's what I liked in Moneyball. But I use it as a bad reference because at one point Billy Beane says, "Adapt or die." Which is great. He didn't get the requisite buy-in that he needed, but at the same time, I did appreciate the stance. Like, you're either on board or you're not. And if you're not, GTFO. Right, and we can absolutely make it happen. So I'm absolutely there, and I love watching movies through a leadership lens. And I'm looking at, because of this mass hysteria and the pandemic and the apocalypse coming, I'm looking at hydroponics and aquaponics. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, this is a really good leadership metaphor. As I'm understanding how to grow seeds and how all this process happens, like that's just somebody young coming into an organization or a system. And so I'm absolutely with you, like finding value in these obscure type of movies and different settings. But along those ways, you talk about some of the people who are probably very competent, very credible, and probably worthy of being, commanders or group commanders or wing commanders that just by hook or by crook just don't get those opportunities that may build some scar tissue. And I don't think we talk enough about scar tissue throughout our career. Is that there's things that we've had with and again, as you alluded to at the very beginning, is you have some bad bosses and they did things so horribly wrong that you'll never do them that way because of that person. I call that scar tissue. Do you have any scar tissue that you sit right now that forces you to do things specifically in one way or prevents you from doing them in another?
Yeah, I think I've got plenty of it. Some of it's by observation, right? That's, I used to to tell my kids, right? It's better to learn watching somebody else completely fall on their face than experience yourself. Just take their word for it. It sucks, you know. But you know, I think that I've watched, you know, one of my story I tell when guys ask how I ended up, you know, as a when I'm back at Pope the second time, how did I end up on the ground with you know, Joint Special Operations Task Force as an air planner and effectively working as an ALO for a certain team. They're like, well, how did you land there? And I'm like, well, actually, it was a really bad experience because I'd spent all this time developing these tactics that we were working with the 160th SOAR, with the little birds in particular. We were developing, and we'd done a number of different deployments, stateside deployments to work out this integration that we had, these very specialized tactics between A-10s and little birds. And we were getting ready to now build it into a larger plan, which was going to go into the opening of Iraqi freedom. And so I'm sitting in this meeting with the group commander and the 2 squadron commanders at the time on the chief wing weapons. And where the group commander goes, hey, the call came out. SOCOM is tasking one of our 2 squadrons because of our habitual training relationship with them to deploy with this construct, this Task Force Tiger construct of CAFSOF. This was the birth of CAFSOF integration at the time. And normally our squadrons, as you remember, deploy back to back. You know, it's more efficient with the iron. And so we had been in Afghanistan, and then our sister squadron, my wife's squadron, had just come home. And so now we're spinning up for Iraq. And so it's my squadron, the squadron I was attached to, it was our turn. We're in the hopper. But for whatever reason, the group commander is sitting there with the 2 squadron commanders and says, hey, who wants it? And I think everybody was caught off guard a little bit by that question. And I saw 2 personalities just starkly at that moment, which was my squadron commander, which was not the alpha in the pack at the time, and my wife's squadron commander, who was. And he recognized the hesitation and jumped and went, we're taking it. 75th has it. And I was like, whoa, what just happened? And, you know, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I go out to into the hallway and I said, hey, Bino, Colonel Turner, you're going to take me, right? I'm like, I built this thing from the ground up. He's like, no. He's like, your wife's in my squadron. You're not. You're not both going. She is. Sorry. And of course, then the phone rang like 12 hours later from across the street. And they're like, hey, heard you're not going to be flying in it, so you can come with us on the ground. You know, and so that was one of the things I saw. And it was scar tissue, but it was good scar tissue. One, the leadership lesson, but I got so much more experience there. I think the other really serious scar tissue I had was as a group commander. And it goes back to your point. And it was, again, maybe, you know, I have to attribute it to some lack of maturity on my, you know, from my standpoint or from my side of it. But I unfortunately had I went through 4 wing commanders in a year. It wasn't because they got fired or anything. It was just things were changing so rapidly downrange with the construct of the groups. And we were in the middle of the drawdown in Afghanistan from the surge. And so, you know, one of my wing commanders rotated out, and then we stood the wing down. So I got another wing commander, and then he rotated. And so I was having to adapt. And I suddenly had a wing commander who he and I did not operate the same way. And I did not adapt. And what I did was I kept doing things my way. It had worked for my previous 2 wing commanders. It was my method of operations, which is I get forward in the straps. You know, it's what I teach my subordinate commanders, which is I would rather be grabbing you by the collar and reefing you back than putting my foot in your ass because you're not going anywhere. So I was forward in the straps. He didn't like it. And I got my collar pulled a couple times and I did not figure it out. And it led to a very troubled relationship with my boss. And, and what I came, and I fought it nonstop. Because in my mind, he was wrong. He wasn't doing it the right way. He didn't get it. But what I was failing to recognize was my bullheadedness and lack of adaptation to his style of business, whether I liked it or not, was hurting my unit. Because he was getting pissed with me, and what it was causing him to do was micromanage me more, which was boxing me in further. And so it was eating up all my bandwidth. And so, it took me some reflection before I figured out that, I was just hell set on the fact that it was him. It's no, baby, it's me, it's not you. Well, it was the other way around. I was convinced it was him. Like, he is constraining me. This is bullshit. I am not conforming. I'm in the right, you're in the wrong. And I didn't realize it doesn't matter, right? If you can't find a way to work within that construct, and it doesn't matter, my take on it was like, I don't care if I don't get a strap. I'm doing it my way. Well, I was missing it wasn't about me. And in my mind, I think I built that up as, I'll take this one for the team. Well, no, actually the team's taking it for you, jackass.
Right.
Because if you don't figure out how to work within his construct, you're growing inefficiencies within your unit. And in this case, you're probably hurting the larger mission by doing so. So that was a pretty big piece of scar tissue I tried to take into wing command. I don't know how, jury's out how well I actually did it. But that was something that definitely, I carry a lot of licks on my back from that.
Sorry, I was just taking notes. Like, that just ended up being like a phenomenal metaphor for me. Like no, number one, thank you for being so honest with that. And that's talk about emotional intelligence, right? And so to be able to sit there, I really appreciate that lessons learned, because that's just, I've struggled to find a way to tell people that, because I've seen so many people like, oh, I'm going to take this one, or I see people fall on the sword. What I used to tell people is, commander, people only get one sword. You fall on that sword, that's it. You're dead. But I think what I just kind of pieced together here is, like, if you're a good leader and your team has your back and you fall on your sword, you're stabbing them too. It's going to go, it's going to affect both. So I really appreciate that lesson learned. But I can only imagine what kind of stress that created for you personally in a combat environment, trying to find your way through that. And I know you and I have spoken about the concept of oxygen and mindfulness, and the study with Dr. Janelle McCauley and all that stuff. So what do you, and we'll kind of talk about your family after this, but in those times, or during your stressful times, or as you prepare for retirement, what are the things that you do to be right with you? What do you do to restore your soul and just make you the best soup Campbell that you can possibly be?
And like, back to that case, like, and this is, I'm sure, I'm not going to say anything you haven't heard before, and you espouse it as well, right? Just, you got to have your battle buddy. And that takes on different forms, right? Like, downrange, doing the 18-hour day thing, I don't have literal bandwidth or time to reach back to my battle buddy at home, which is my wife, and get that stuff out, right? And so that's the thing, is you have to get it out, right? It's a toxin. Like, if you are grinding on that, man, it's going to eat you alive. And so in this case, and that's one of the things I used to tell, like, hey, it's great to be, a junior leader or a captain, where you can sit there and sport bitch, to all your peers. But once you move, as you move up, you have less peers to sport bitch at. I'm like, I say, as a wing commander, required me to pick up the phone, right? But like, downrange, it was my battle buddy, my superintendent, my chief, right? And that was my chief, had to endure but because I can't say those things in front of my subordinates, right? About the wing command. Okay. But my chief, I can, because he knows that I'm not disparaging the wing commander. I'm espousing my frustration. But if I do that in public, it comes off a lot different.
Right.
My chief knows that I need like, and I also need a moment for him to go, sir, pull your head out of your ass, and that's part of that battle buddy, that agreement, right? Is that you're always going to shoot each other straight. So that in the leadership realm, that's where I say that's where I get my oxygen is like as a leader, when you're absorbing all those decisions, and some really tough ones, that are changing people's lives or ending them. You cannot just, we talk about compartmentalization, but you cannot hold on to that. And so, and being able to come in and go, have that honest conversation, go, Chief, I don't know that I just made the right decision, and have a chief that says, I don't think you did. I mean, that to me that restores me. I mean, like even in that may be a shot to the heart initially, right?
Right.
But it restores me in going, okay, I've got myself back to wade into battle again tomorrow, whether it's in combat or, in the whatever AOR you're in. For me, I think is, on a day-to-day basis is, having my wife, which I have the advantage of having another fighter pilot that lives with me, who understands my mindset, how I think, how I approach things. And so that makes my life a lot easier, because I can talk jargon shop, acronyms and everything all day long, and she gets it, right? She's done the same thing her whole life. So I probably have an unfair advantage in that matter when, she gets, when I talk, when we start talking about killing people and breaking things, she understands that. She's been a commander. She understands tough decisions. We can sit around the kitchen table and talk about, today's tough decision at the office kind of thing. But, for me, it's just, it's getting outside, and, I'm lucky enough, as you alluded to be in Colorado and have a view of the mountains out my front door, but get outside and run. But I think one of the things that my wife and I talk about this all the time, there's a good book out there. It's not a leadership book per se, but it's The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, right? And
Mark Manson, I think, is
yeah, yep. And I think that's a key, like that's part of it, right? Like, and she and I talk about this all the time, because I'm not very much, that's water under the bridge. Like that has happened. It is behind us. And I'm like, I'm a guy about, doing the debriefing the mission. But if you just hang on all day long to, a bad call, a bad event, whatever, like you need to recognize that, okay, that's done. Like I need to extract what I can from it and move out. But if I hang back there all day long looking in the rearview mirror, like, so for me, it's just the, I'm a next step. I try to keep looking forward, and not hang on those regrets, because we all have too many of them. So, and remember, and and then looking at it and going, and I've got two young boys, and that helps me kind of stay centered on what's important.
Nice. And so no, number one, I love that book as well. I thought it was going to be a lot more snarky and or frat tire Tucker Max-esque,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not downplaying Tucker Max. His stuff is hysterical. It's funny, but I read that book. That was way more insightful than I would have originally anticipated. And so if you're out there, you're watching, you're listening, and you haven't read it, and that title is kind of off-putting, I would really put that aside and give that book a great opportunity, because it's very introspective as far as how he understands and goes through things.
It's the art of control, right? And it's something I'm a fighter pilot, right? We control everything, and so we think, right? And so it's the idea that you don't, and recognizing where that doesn't exist. I think instead of constantly being in search of how do I control something, recognizing that some of them, I had a great squadron commander, and he and I are great friends. I think you remember him, Coach Allison. Coach.
I was just working with Coach.
Yeah, I was gonna say you were in Coach's back seat not long ago. But Coach is the one who first told me, timing is everything and there's no justice. And I went, and what it was we looked around, and I remember, like, in our community, he's a larger than life in the A10 community. I mean, he grew me as a pup. And, at the time, and then his time came, but at the time, here he was, a squadron commander, one of the most fabled A10 pilots, 4,000 hours in the jet, had never been in combat. And, and this is, so remember, this is before 9/11. And so it was just wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. He missed Desert Storm, because certain squadrons went and certain didn't. And, here he is, like the burning bush, one of them in our community. And that was one of the things he reminded guys of. He's like, look, and I own that all the time. I've told guys this. I said, look, I go, everybody, like, a lot of times when you look at senior leaders, it's like they had a moment. And granted, it's the whole, I'm going to screw up the quote. The chief uses it all the time, right? Seneca, opportunity where preparation meets or pork back. But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, luck is when opportunity meets preparation.
Yeah, meets preparation, right? And so, you make your own luck that way, right? But there is still that moment of opportunity, and I say, are you prepared for it? And I said, for me, for me it was 4 days. 4 days in March 2002. I right place, right time. Was I prepared? Yeah. I got sent in for a reason, but that was timing, right? A month earlier, the Eielson A-10 squadron was in. My career looks a lot, I know it. My career looks a lot different without that moment. But yeah, I think that's a big, I think that's always stuck with me, Coach saying that. And because I know of guys and gals out there who've been frustrated because that moment never came to them. Asking that when you mentioned that earlier, those guys and gals who had the ability to be wing commanders but never met the opportunity. It is that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and for those of you, when he mentions March 2002, we're talking Operation Anaconda, like the first major offensive into Afghanistan after September 11th. So probably more of a bigger discussion for a later time there soon. Swapping war stories.
Yeah.
I was in Korea at the time. But the thing that I do want to end on is, and again, thank you for a career by and large predicated on warfare. And so during all of this, during your professional development, throughout all your different moves and PCSs, throughout the education, and every year or two having to do different things while being married, like almost perfectly the entire time, raising 2 young sons. There are a lot of people who are struggling with this work-life balance. I used to call it work-life integration. Now I do call it work-life harmony, as far as how you do all those things. So how did that work? So as a very successful A-10 pilot, married to another successful A-10 pilot, to have to sacrifice and do all the things that you need to do to have those same careers and doing it roughly on the same timelines. How did you guys manage that?
A lot of luck and timing. A lot of it, I think the thing that we talk about, we actually get asked about this a lot. The cadets are enamored with this. I think they plan so far ahead, which is interesting because, and they're not millennials anymore, they're Gen Zers. But, we said, we took it one assignment at a time. And there was always offsets, right? We didn't shoot the moon, i.e., we tried to find what would work for both of us, which may not be the perfect location or the perfect assignment, but we tried to find trade space. And sometimes, I will say Kim sacrificed way more than I did over time. I think she gave up more than I did. And I think, like right from the get-go, when we first, it's not all perfect, right? I think we said the first 5 years we were married, we physically lived together for 8 months. And that was because of back-to-back deployments, weapons school. I went to Korea for a year, we couldn't sync up our assignments perfectly. They were offset by a year. But it was keeping the bigger and longer, having a long view and going, okay, let's take a little bit of short range pain for long range gain. And so, because I was a jump balo back then, the way they suckered you into being a jumper, right, was because A-10 guys are like, why would I potentially hurt myself so I can't fly? No, I'm not going to jump. But it was, if you jump, you'll get your choice of assignments, operational assignment on the backside. And so first example was I leave Pope and I go to weapons school, which makes me a worldwide volunteer. So no choice, I get to go to Korea. And then I go, hey, I'm leaving Korea. I still have this golden ticket for being a jump balo, right? They're like, well, if we can find a weapons officer billet. And so so at the time, Kim and I had hatched this plan. We're going to go to Eielson, but she was thinking about taking an F-16. So all of a sudden she gets an A-10. And I'm looking at it and I go, call back the assignment guy and I go, yeah, that anywhere in the world, I'd like to go back to Pope. And he's like, what? He's like, you can go any A-10 assignment. You don't want to go to Spangdahlem or Eielson or Tucson. You want to go back to Fayetteville. I'm like, yes, because that's where there are 2 operational squadrons and my wife and I can be stationed together. And so, that was one of those things. But I think that just, I took command of my fighter squadron, and 2 weeks after that, she deployed for 6 months to Kabul. And so I built a team, right? I mean, my teammate is downrange. And so I built a team locally of, the wing commander's spouse, the vice wing commander's spouse, the ops group commander's spouse. They were all on speed dial so that the runway's closed. I'm stuck orbiting over the top of the field. My kid's at the child development center that closes in 15 minutes because I've had to time it that tight. So I call the ops desk and say, hey, run the recall roster, start calling down my list of people who can go get my kid out of the CDC because I'm not going to land in time. And, we always had that support network who were always willing to jump in. I think that, we volunteered to go to DC because we knew that had the most options. Would I have rather gone to HICM, to PACAF or PACOM to do my joint job? Hell yeah, versus going to the Pentagon. But we knew that with our timing and War College, and she had an internship, and I was going to likely get sent down range for a year. I left her at home with a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old. I walked our 5-year-old to the first day of kindergarten, and I jumped on the rotator to Kandahar for her. And she stayed back with those 2 kids while working at the Atlantic Council in a high-level internship as a colonel while I was gone. And, I think, another big piece was just communication. We always we looked one assignment at a time. I didn't take the bonus. I took a job to get us to school together. I took a job as the 2-stars aide at Nellis. I did not want to do that job. That job, it was awesome in retrospect, but at the time I was like, I don't want to be carrying the general's bags and his hat around. I'm a weapons school instructor. It turned, but the wing commander goes, you 2 want to leave here together and go to school together? That's what you're doing. Yes, sir. And we had good leaders looking out for us. And I think a key part of that was always communicating to them what our priorities were. And the priority was we stay together. After our early years as young captains, as we started moving into having a family, we said, rule 1 is we stay together, or one or both of us step off this train. And by being, I think, very open and upfront, that allowed our leadership and our mentors to really stay engaged with us, give us good inputs and recommendations, help us where they could, and steer the ship at times to keep our family unit together and allow us to continue to serve. So I think all those things, it's a lot, but it's, as we tell our cadets, it's absolutely doable. You just have to, as you and I led off today with, you have to have clear expectations. And you can't go in, with a Pollyannish view on how it's all going to work out. Recognize there's going to be bumps in the road. You're going to suck it up a couple of times for the longer view.
You bet. That's a phenomenal way to end this. And again, if you go back and if you were taking notes or watching or listening to this, you heard all measures of CAPE. Here at the very end, you hear Colonel Campbell talking about what he cares about, how he can align himself to make sure that he can do that. He's listening to different perspectives and let people impact. And then lastly, having a solid discussion about expectations. And this is absolutely throughout the conversation. But Colonel Campbell, as always, it is great just to catch up. I appreciate you not only finding the time, but making the time to be here for this podcast. We'll kind of open it up for any last minute remarks you have, sir.
No, it's great to, I think I like to tell my cadets about, I know that you know this, and I alluded to it when you were out here talking to our cadets, about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now. But I point out that those relationships we build, in the military, and why you want to nurture them, why you want to maintain them, because as I like to say, is you never know when that three-striper who taught you how to properly use the Prick 113 and program it and call CAS and not look like a jackass in front of the Army, how 20 years later you may find yourself trying to hire him as your wing command chief. I said, that's like, just think through that for a moment. And I said, that's just one relationship. I'm like, just think of all those intersections you're going to have. And I tell him, I said, that's what's important. I said, because you never know when you're going to walk into that moment and you're going to need one of those relationships again to lean on, to ask for advice, to reconnect, or to reestablish, that working relationship. So, I think it's pretty cool just to imagine us sitting in the, in the motor pool at the 14th ASOS, 25, 23 years ago, and having this discussion going, what's going to happen 2 decades from now? We're going to be having this interview.
You bet.
I think it's pretty cool. So it's awesome, and so cool for me to be on with you for this, because it's kind of a cool way as I'm closing out my career to have this, be one of those last things I'm doing before I hang up my spurs.
Roger that, sir. So again, I appreciate it. Congratulations for a phenomenal career, and again for a life spent on warfare, and then at the very end getting to use some of that knowledge to just shape the youngest generation who don't know it, who are preparing for it. And again, in a contemporary American environment where I think people aren't taught to be too selfless these days, to where you get to still affect and, impart some knowledge on the lives of people who are going to lead our next generation. Congratulations. That's awesome. And, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you tuning in. I really appreciate your viewership, your listenership. And as always, we'll catch you back here on the Cape Lead Revolution. And this is Chacha reminding you to always educate, anticipate, and dominate. We'll talk to you later. See ya.